He held the bus for 10 minutes, and 2 days later, 5 men on motorcycles pulled up outside his house. No one could have guessed how it would end. Stop that changed everything. Everything on his route ran like clockwork. Ryan started the engine at 6:42, turned onto First Street at 6:59, and by 7:05 he always pulled up in front of Linton's supermarket. There, by a wooden bench under a faded awning, John would be waiting, a silver-haired man with a slight stoop and his usual black thermos in hand. Every weekday, never late, not even in the rain. But that morning the bench was empty. Ryan braked smoothly, as always. The bus doors opened with a gentle pneumatic sigh. Passengers began to board, some holding coffee, others with eyes still clouded by sleep. A few gave him a nod, others passed in silence. Ryan didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the spot where John usually stood, next to a worn-out "Buy Two, Pay for One" poster. The place where, every morning, a hand would lift a warm cup and a voice would offer a familiar line. "Morning, Ryan." "Looks like a Tuesday." No coffee, no John. The minute hand on his watch ticked forward. A second passed, then another. The cabin behind him grew quiet. The passengers were used to his exact timing. Some were already waiting for the engine to kick in. Some glanced at their watches, but he kept waiting. His fingers tightened slightly around the wheel. He tried not to dwell on it, but something strange was building inside. Not worry, not yet. Just emptiness. As if a small inner mechanism that always clicked at the right time had suddenly jammed. Maybe he overslept, Ryan thought. Or maybe the bus was a minute early. Or the thermos spilled and he went back home. Rational thoughts, lined up like sandbags to hold back the one unwanted idea. What if something happened? 5 minutes. "Hey, driver, are we going or what?" someone called out from the back row. Ryan didn't answer. His eyes never left the stop. He knew he was breaking protocol. He knew the schedule was now off and that the supervisors probably wouldn't be forgiving. But he also knew one other thing. In 2 years, John had never been late. Not once. Which meant something wasn't right. When the familiar figure finally appeared around the corner, Ryan almost let out a breath. John was walking quickly, clutching his jacket with one hand and his chest with the other. No thermos, no smile. But he was walking, and that was enough. Ryan didn't know that. By waiting, he was putting his job in jeopardy. He only knew one thing. You don't leave until John is on the bus. Ryan was the kind of person who always showed up early. He lived with his parents in a 2-unit house beyond the railroad tracks, in a neighborhood that smelled of bread in the morning from the nearby bakery and of motor oil in the evening from the station garage. Each day began the same way. A short stretch, 2 eggs, coffee in a travel mug. At the depot stop, he'd arrive 10 minutes before his shift. Not because he was afraid of being late, but because it was the right thing to do. He believed in order, that every street had a route, every person a rhythm, especially a bus. His job was simple but never empty. He knew the route down to the inch. 32 stops, 6 traffic lights, 3 hills, 1 railroad crossing where he always had to wait. The faces in the bus would change, but the route stayed the same. That gave him a strange sense of stability, as if by doing everything right, the rest of the city might hold together too. Sometimes, though, that feeling was disrupted, like when a young mother boarded with a fussy toddler and the whole back of the bus started buzzing with irritation, or when a student paid their fare with coins, one at a time slowly, or when an elderly man refused to give up his seat to a woman with a crutch. Ryan never intervened loudly. He would simply turn to the mirror and look, calmly, but in a way that the passengers noticed. Sometimes that was enough. He wasn't rude, but he had principles. That's what set him apart from the other drivers in the break room. The ones who joked about how fast they could launch seniors around corners or who blasted music between stops. Ryan never laughed at those jokes, not because he thought he was better, but because to him this job meant something personal. One of the few people who seemed to understand that was John. John was at an age when people stopped pretending. He was always polite, always paid the exact fare, always thanked the driver, sometimes with a quiet nod, sometimes with a warm phrase, "Hope everyone makes it where they need to go today." At first, Ryan just smiled. Then he started looking forward to those words and to the coffee. Every morning, when the doors opened at Linton's, John would step on board, hand Ryan a warm cup, and say, "I don't know about you, but for me, the day starts with a win." A win, as John defined it, meant making it to the stop again, not running late, not catching a cold, not losing his fare card. Small things. But Ryan understood. He understood because his own father, who lived in the same hallway just a door away, rarely called anything a win, rarely called anything anything at all. When Ryan was a boy, his dad would come home late, often with a bottle, heavy steps, and short words. In the mornings, he'd leave without saying a thing. Even when Ryan got his diploma, even when he landed a new job, there was no reaction, only silence and tired eyes. And that taught Ryan one thing. Not all fathers know how to be fathers. But that doesn't mean you don't need one. John didn't know he'd become something like a father to Ryan. Or maybe he suspected. Sometimes there was a softness in his expression, the kind that only comes from a man who's raised sons and learned that presence matters more than advice. "You know," John said one morning, settling into the front seat, "sometimes I see one of my boys in you. You're always steady, never rushing, never angry. That's rare." Ryan didn't know how to respond. He just smirked and gave a nod, then added, "You're the only one who greets me like it really means something." They never returned to the topic. They didn't have to. Their understanding lived in the coffee, the quiet of the early hour, and the brief glances in the mirror. And that's why, that morning, when John didn't show up at the stop, Ryan couldn't just drive away. It wasn't about breaking the schedule. It was about principle. The bus had been standing still for 2 minutes. People began exchanging looks. A man with headphones glanced up from his screen with irritation. A woman by the window pulled out her phone and typed something with an expression of offended determination. Someone whispered, "What's going on? Why aren't we moving?" Ryan watched through the mirror. The seats were nearly full. A few passengers were already tapping their feet with impatience. Outside the windshield, the stop remained empty. Only a torn trash bag fluttered in the wind near the foot of the bench. He glanced at the clock. 7:06. According to the schedule, he should have pulled out at 7:02. "I need to go," Ryan thought. It's already been almost 5 minutes. He could feel the voice of discipline rising inside him. "You're letting down the next passengers. You're putting yourself at risk. You're putting the company at risk." But there was another voice, quieter and more insistent. John was never late. Not today, not in the rain, not even on that day when the stop was slick with ice and he showed up with a bandage on his chin, because he'd fallen on the way, but still came. Ryan looked down at the dashboard. His fingers gripped the wheel tighter than usual. It felt as though, if he let go now, something wouldn't break in the vehicle, but inside himself. "Hey, driver," someone shouted from the back row. "Is this a bus or a hotel? Are we leaving today or what?" Ryan shifted his eyes to the mirror. Their gazes met. He didn't answer, just exhaled softly through his nose and looked back out to the street. By the 6th minute, the rustling of seats began. People stood up, leaning forward to get a look. "This is unacceptable," said a woman in a business suit. "I have a meeting at 7:30. I don't have time for your sense of nobility." "Why are we standing here?" snapped a man with a scuffed briefcase. "Is this about someone running late?" Ryan turned toward them. "I'm waiting for one person," he said calmly. "He's always on time. Something's wrong today." "And why should we care?" someone shot back. "Maybe you don't need to," Ryan replied. "But I do." Yerimani Pattanimridam. In the distance, beyond the corner of the store, a figure appeared. First just a hesitant silhouette, then a familiar scarf, then the walk, quick with a slight limp. It was John. He was gripping the collar of his jacket against the wind. No coffee, no smile, a strange tension in his face. Ryan didn't move. He simply waited until he came closer. When John stepped up onto the bus, he was short of breath. He paused, leaning against the rail, and said hoarsely, "Ryan, I thought you'd gone already. Sorry, I waited," Ryan said. "Are you okay?" Bit of pressure in my chest. Probably just my blood pressure. I called in sick, told them I wasn't feeling right. But my boss said, "You had your day off yesterday, so come in today." So I came. Ryan noticed his fingers trembling. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod and helped him to a seat. "Sorry, didn't have time to grab the coffee," John added as he sat down. "It's fine," Ryan said quietly. "What matters is that you're here." He closed the doors, turned the key, and the bus pulled away. The cabin buzzed with dissatisfaction. Some passengers talked loudly and pointedly, but Ryan didn't listen. He looked straight ahead, at the road, the wet asphalt, the next turn. He knew he hadn't followed procedure. He knew someone had probably hit the complaint button. He knew there would be consequences. But he also knew that these had been the most important 10 minutes of his working life. The call came during his third loop of the route. "Ryan, they need you in HR, right after your shift, immediately," said the dispatcher. The voice was mechanical, practiced, with no hint of conversation. He hung up without waiting for a reply. After the last stop, Ryan turned off the ignition, checked the cabin, wiped down the railings. All routine, except his heart was beating slightly faster than it should have. He drove back to the depot and stepped off the bus with a weight in his chest. A light rain had started to fall, leaving dark circles on his jacket. He passed the parking lot, past other drivers, some sipping coffee, some staring into their phones. No one looked up. The HR office was on the second floor of an old brick building with a chipped sign. Below the administration plaque, a green light was always on, as if it were an invitation or a warning. He knocked. "Come in," said a familiar voice. Behind the desk sat Mr. Phillips, the shift supervisor, gray-haired, deep lines around his mouth, and a tie he never took off, not even in summer. A tired man, held upright by a coil of inner tension. "Sit down, Ryan," he said without looking up, flipping through papers. "I assume you know what this is about." Ryan sat. "I was a bit delayed at a stop, sir." "A bit is generous. We've had 3 complaints this morning. One from a woman who missed an important meeting, one from a man who missed his transfer, and one with a detailed description of your personal approach to passengers." Phillips looked up. "Is it true?" Ryan nodded. "Yes, sir. I was waiting for someone. He's always on time. That morning he wasn't." "Is he a friend of yours?" "A passenger." Phillips folded his arms. "Ryan, you've worked here for 10 years. Not a single serious infraction. Not one complaint, until today. But rules aren't like a window you crack open on a warm day. They're like a door. We either keep it shut or we don't." Silence hung between them. "We appreciate your consistency, but consistency doesn't grant immunity. As of today, you're temporarily suspended from routes. 2 weeks, unpaid." The words came out calm, routine, like a diagnosis spoken after a basic checkup. Ryan straightened in his chair. "Understood. You can come back. This isn't a dismissal. Just think about this. You're not here to rescue individuals. You're here to move everyone, smoothly, without disruption. And what if one of those everyone needed help more than the rest today?" The question was soft, without challenge. Phillips paused. Something shifted in his face, just briefly. Then he dropped his eyes back to the papers. "You're free to go, Ryan. It's all in the formal notice." He walked down the stairs slowly. The rain was getting heavier. The gray day felt even dimmer now. The pavement beneath his feet grew darker. When he entered the house, his mother stood by the stove. "You're early," she said without turning around. "Something happened?" He took off his jacket and hung it on the hook. "Just tired," he said. It wasn't a lie. He just didn't give her the details. That evening, he sat by the window watching the raindrops slide down the glass. A mug in his hands. Not the coffee John used to bring. Not as hot. Not as needed. He didn't regret it. But something tightened inside, not from fear of losing the job, but from knowing that the right decision doesn't always look right to everyone else. He didn't yet know that in 2 days his life would change. He only knew that given the chance, he'd make the same choice again. On the second morning after his suspension, Ryan didn't wake up to his alarm. For the first time in a long while, the alarm still went off at 5:40 just like always, but he didn't get up. He lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the tick of the hands. He knew someone would be standing at the Linton stop that morning, looking toward the road without an answer. And no one would be picking up coffee that day. He didn't rise until close to 8. He drank instant coffee in the kitchen without fully stirring it. He answered his mother with single words, said morning to his father simply out of habit. The rest of the day passed like slow motion. The newspaper remained untouched. The TV showed a fishing program, then the news, then silence. Ryan sat by the window as if waiting for the phone to ring again. But no one called until the next morning. It happened at 9:12. He remembered the exact time because the second hand on the kitchen clock had just passed 12 when he heard the sound. At first, it was a faint rumble, then a low, steady hum, then a rolling chorus of engines as if someone had started an entire motorcycle fleet right outside his house. He stepped onto the porch barefoot, still holding his mug. 5 motorcycles stood in front of his house, black, heavy, polished. Each one had a man astride it, jackets, helmets, posture like men who didn't waste time explaining themselves. One of them removed his helmet. He was older than the others, with thick dark hair, a square jaw, and firm features that weren't unfriendly, just confident. He stepped closer and extended a hand. "Ryan, I'm Ethan, John's oldest son." Ryan raised an eyebrow slightly. "John? He told us about you. Said you didn't show up at the route yesterday. He was worried. My brothers and I thought we'd check in on you. Mind if we talk for a minute?" Ryan stepped aside. "Sure, come in." But none of them entered. They all remained outside. Ethan continued. "Our father doesn't often speak warmly about people, but he spoke about you differently. Said, he's not just a driver, he's someone you can count on, even when no one else does." Ryan looked down at the ground. "He was just important to me. That's all." "You're wrong," Ethan said gently. "He told us how you waited for him, how you were concerned, how you always asked if he was okay. We know they suspended you, and we decided if you do all that for one man, then you're someone who can be trusted with more." Ryan frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, but what are you getting at?" Ethan gave a faint smile. "We started a logistics company, small scale, motorcycle delivery, private routes, order management, and we need someone with a clear head, a sense of order and integrity. Dad told us you used to dream about working for yourself, so we want to offer you the position of operations manager." Ryan froze. For a second, everything vanished. The street, the drizzle, the spots on the concrete path. Only a voice in his head remained. "You always wanted this, your whole life, but not like this, not from here." "I don't know what to say," he said quietly. "Say yes. We'll teach you the rest. The salary's 3 times what you make now, and you'll be working with people who respect you. We're not building an empire, just a business where everyone knows their role, and we want you with us." Ryan lowered his gaze. His hands were trembling. He remembered dreaming of his own company as a teenager, sketching logos in the margins of notebooks, saving up for a license, believing that kindness and discipline would one day lead to something real. Then over the years, how life slowly squeezed that dream smaller. How he got stuck in morning timetables and sharp voices from the back rows, and how he'd come to think it would always be that way. He exhaled. "Yes, I accept." Ethan nodded. "Dad will be happy. He said if you said yes, he'd quit his old job and come work with us, just to mop floors or make coffee." "Seriously, very seriously," he said, "I want to start my days with Ryan. He softens the world." They left as suddenly as they had arrived, and Ryan stood on the porch, mug empty in his hand, feeling, for the first time in years, that morning wasn't just another day. It felt like something had begun. On his first day at the new job, Ryan left the house 40 minutes early, just like always. He wasn't sure what kind of dress code was appropriate, so he simply put on a clean shirt, jeans, and a jacket. Not the one he wore when he drove the bus. That one still carried the scent of steering wheels, frosty mornings, and plastic seats. Today he wanted to smell like something different. The logistics company was based in a former hangar on the edge of town, where once they'd repaired farm equipment, there were now racks with navigation tools, wall maps of the region, tables with laptops and tablets, and beyond the hangar doors, dozens of motorcycles, all in the same gray-blue livery. No chrome, no flash. Just clean mechanics and purpose. On the wall hung a small banner, Tandem Courier Systems, delivered with dignity. Ryan paused in front of it for a moment, not because of the slogan, but because of one word: dignity. It was rare in his life, and even rarer in a job. Inside, the hangar buzzed with movement and voices. Someone was adjusting a headset. Someone else was tightening a taillight. Someone was already complaining about a delayed shipment. But none of it sounded annoying. It all had weight. It was work. Ethan was waiting by the entrance. "Glad you made it," he said. "Ready to dive in?" Ryan nodded. "It's simple here," Ethan explained. 3 main routes, 4 shifts, but the key is people. We're not trying to compete with the big networks. We go where they don't bother to, where someone still wants a handshake instead of a QR code. You're the coordinator. You manage logistics, riders, routes, and the unexpected. Think you're up for that? "I am," Ryan said, only realizing afterward that he was already smiling. The first days were intense. He had to learn a new rhythm, one that wasn't measured in minutes but in outcomes. He made calls, ran calculations, checked inventories. He remapped routes. Learned to distinguish urgent from important. Learned to trust drivers who didn't treat customers like freight, but like neighbors. And he was surprised at how quickly he began to feel like part of it. On the first day, he had to deal with a young courier who showed up 20 minutes late. The kid was sweaty and apologetic, stumbling over his words. Ryan felt an instinct to scold, but what came out instead was, "You apologized, so you understand. Don't hide the mistake. Fix it in motion. Everything here's alive." The young man nodded, and in his eyes there was no fear. There was respect, the kind Ryan hadn't seen in a long time. On the third day in the break area, he heard a familiar voice. "Ryan, you want tea or coffee?" He turned. John was standing there in a new blue windbreaker with the company logo, a cup in one hand and a mop in the other. "This floor," John said with his usual smile, "it shines even after the rain. Gotta keep it that way." "You work here?" "Of course, I told my sons I wanted to be around, and so you wouldn't snap at me if I forget the coffee again." They both laughed. Later, they sat on the edge of a bench near the wall, like they used to in the bus. Only now the conversation wasn't happening in motion, but in stillness, about how John's youngest had just become a grandfather, how one of the couriers rescued a cat from a vent shaft, how another returned a forgotten ring, and now the couple was inviting him to their wedding. "Are you happy?" John asked suddenly. Ryan paused. He looked at his hands, at the route map, at the door where work bustled just beyond. Yeah," he said, "but in a different way. Not like I accomplished something. More like I've come back to where I was supposed to be all along." A month later, on the day he was officially made a permanent employee, he stepped into a small back room. On the shelf sat a box with his old uniform, yellow vest, worn name badge, and a route log notebook. He didn't take it with him. He just closed the box and wrote on top with a marker, "Thanks for the road, I've switched lanes." On Friday evening, precisely at 6:57 p.m., a man carrying a coffee thermos walked into the logistics center. He wasn't a courier, and he wasn't a client. Just a man in his 70s, wearing a faded baseball cap and a smile that everyone recognized if they had ever visited the place at least once. He passed through the hangar carefully, holding the thermos in both hands, as if he didn't want to spill a single drop. Just like always. At the back desk, between the route maps and a bin full of spare helmets, Ryan was seated. He was wrapping up the day's entries, placing markers, logging delays, reshuffling priorities. The screen in front of him glowed with a soft blue light, just like the windows of a bus on an autumn morning. "You skipped dinner again," said John, setting the thermos on the table. "I'm working on the Daly County Dispatch. It's a mess over there. Ethan can handle it. He's got GPS now." "You've got a stomach," John smirked. Ryan looked at the thermos, then at John. "You come at this exact time on purpose, don't you?" "Of course, it's nearly 7. Almost that same morning, almost that same stop. I just come myself now. No schedule. They sat quietly for a while. Since Ryan started working here, a lot had changed. Not instantly, but for good. There were no applause when he arrived, no awards. Just day by day, a growing sense that people said a little more than before. Thanks, Ryan, for covering. Ryan, it's easy working with you. Ryan, you're the real deal. He didn't know what he had achieved exactly, but he knew people listened now, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One day, a young courier, a kid with a loud voice and a tear at the elbow of his jacket, suddenly said, "You know, boss, working with you feels calm, like it's okay to mess up. You don't scold, you help." Ryan didn't answer. He just nodded. But afterward, he sat alone for a long time, staring into his empty mug, thinking, maybe that's it. The thing my father never said. The thing I always wanted to hear. The thing I can now give to others. In the corner of the office, above the delivery log table, hung a simple photo in a plain frame. In it, the interior of a bus. John sitting in the front row, coffee in hand. Ryan smiling in the rearview mirror. The caption was short, "The road may change, but the principles stay." When Ryan stepped out of the office that evening, it was already getting dark. The asphalt shone with a cold sheen. The motorcycles stood in a row like sentinels. Above them, the sign swayed slightly in the wind, tilted but still bright. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of gasoline, coffee, and dust, a mixture that now defined his world. And he thought, those 10 minutes were worth all of this. He hadn't waited for gratitude. He hadn't chased a second chance. He had simply waited for the right person once, and everything had changed. Not instantly, not loudly, but for real.